Well, in some way, you made an argument that is in favor of genes having to do with the identity of us, because the genes are the only ones that remain constant in that. Like you said, the bones are replaced and the teeth are replaced, or the eyes or the cells.
Until I tell you that every cell in your body has a different genome and that genome is changing. I didn't want to go into these details, but this is now a great discovery over the last few years, that every cell it's changing its genome all the time in a very small manner. And by the time, in fact, in the entities thought that we have more, when you take together all the DNA in our body, we have more mutations than cells in our body. And that to me is a very sobering thought. It's a very sobering thought. This is work that is coming out now from our ability to sequence the DNA of single cells. And we are learning a great deal. So we are changing all the time. It's a very important now. What is the self? What is the? I think we're entering back into philosophical terrain into which I don't have much to say. Not because I don't think it's interesting. It's simply because I don't have much to say.
So, what's another important question? You mentioned, well, what is regulating this balance? That if you go off of it,
that's a fascinating question. I think. I mean, we have no idea what regulates the proportions. You know, you and I are different sizes, but we are equally proportioned. That is a very strange thing. You know, what regulates that? What determines that? How do cells know? Our two arms, they have never met. They develop independently from each other, and yet they are more or less the same length.
Not the genes? The genes don't regulate that?
The genes have to do with that, but they don't. We don't know what regulates that. I mean, other questions. So I think to me this is one of the very important unsolved questions in biology. Issues of what determines the proportions, issues of what determines this. We said what regulates the size of the gut, the skin, because if it goes off for a little bit, you get a very bad condition.
Yes.
You can even die from that condition. So something we don't know very much about this control of proportion growth. That is one of the great outstanding questions in biology. The other, as I say, you wanted some interesting questions, is the origin of multicellularity. You know, that's another interesting question. And of course, I think one of the most fascinating ones is the inventions of novelty, the origin of novelty in evolution. You know, where is the origin of novelty? You know, how do wings appear? How do eyes appear? It's very, very intriguing.
Why is that not solved when Richard Dawkins was at the Royal Institute, I believe, and he showed how an eye can develop just with gradual changes?
No, wait. That is once you. This is back to the famous what we mentioned in the beginning about the difference between natural selection and evolution. You know. Once you have a structure that can give an eye, you can see how that changes. I mean, that is very well understood, how selection can drive the perfection or the modification of a structure. Okay, this is really central to Darwin tenet. Is descent with modification. This is the phrase that he used. But the novelty, the appearance of new structures, it's sometimes more of a challenge in evolution, you know, and we have some ideas. We can see this gradually appearing, but all of a sudden, how the vertebrates appear in a very remarkable bone all of a sudden appears in our life history. It's a very interesting thing. If we had time, we could get into our history and an evolutionary history and how we carry so much baggage from our evolutionary history, and that's a fascinating thing. But the appearance of bones, for example, that's a very all of a sudden. This is the thing about Dawkins. I always say that if life was what Dawkins would like it to be, I think we would all be viruses and bacteria, because all you need is DNA replicating itself and finding. I think that something happened, that when cells were invented, particularly the eukaryotic cell, something happened. A creative ability was unleashed that we are just trying to understand. And I find that very, very interesting, and particularly that transition from unicellularity to multicellularity. I think it's right now a very big and interesting problem. And then the appearance of different groups, there is it's a very remarkable process and one that raises many exciting questions.
I'm not understanding the difference between selection and evolution. So it's my understanding that evolution is selection, variance, and replicability or reproducibility. But is that what you mean, that natural selection is just one of the ingredients?
No, evolution has a very important component of what you've said. Evolution has a very important component of what you say. But that's exactly what you said. If you have a structure, now you can turn it into a different structure. The fins of a fish, we can see how they are transformed through a slow modification into our arms or into a wings, or how wings, the limbs can become wings, and how wings can be varied in a bat or in a squirrel or so all those things are fine. And that natural selection can explain, okay? That is not a problem. But the appearance of bone, for example, it's a very remarkable thing.
So, Professor, I'm confused. Is this an open question in the field? So that is to say, if you were to poll other evolutionary biologists, would they say, we don't know how novel structures emerge? Or are you saying that to you, and maybe to some of your colleagues, it's unclear how novel structures emerge? Evolutionarily, that is.
I think you will find, Curt, that there is people that feel that simple descent with modification and variation can also explain that, okay? In terms of genes, you will find a very strong component of that.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that there are things that you will then find another group of people that would say that you cannot explain that simply with the genes driving the process. I'm not saying that the genes are not involved, but with the genes driving the process. So modification of structures into other structures, we probably can explain by switches in allelic frequencies and in genes. But novelties is something completely different, okay? Which in the end you may be able to map to genes, but I think at the moment we need to think about this. And I think the cell as a very important element in the process, also even of selection, it's a consideration that we need to include. I think that's, as I said, a missing link that we need to explore now that we are understanding a lot about cells. And it's what I told you. How do cells know how to count? How do the cells know how many cells are they in an aggregate in order to build an embryo?
Yes.
Embryos have length scales. They are very small, all for a reason, because so all those things are influencing the ability of genes. So it could be they could say, well, yes, we get a new gene that involves a protein that can sense. Yeah, but I think there is no one gene, one particular protein. I think these emergent properties are a bit more complicated. I think, as I said, you would find two camps if you were to discuss with evolutionary biologists. Ones that say we can explain everything with genes. I think there is a danger in using a hammer to try to see everything in a nail. I think sometimes we just have to admit there is no problem. I'm not saying that there is anything magical. I'm not saying, like Dennis Noble, that we need a new theory of evolution. We need to incorporate the cell into our current theory of evolution. That's what I would say.
What the heck is neo-Darwinism, and what's the difference between that and Darwinism?
Well, it's what I said in the beginning. That is a crucial moment. Darwinism, what Darwin saw, that you could explain that descent with modification as a continuous process was a very important element in the creation of variation on the Earth. Okay,
what type of modification you said?
Well, it's what I can say. You can take the fin of a fish and the arm of a mammal, okay, and you can see how through slow processes you can transform the bone structure that give rise to the fin. You can see how by small changes, little by little, it will be transformed into the limb of a vertebrate, of us, okay, of a tetrapod, as they are called. So, the fin, you can see how slowly will be.
I understand.
And that's continuing. For Darwin, this was a continuous process. Now, the problem that Darwin had is that he couldn't find the material basis for that. He was very frustrated. He made many mistakes. When they discovered the genes, in the beginning, it was not clear what genes had to do with evolution. But slowly it became, very quickly it became clear that they could be the material basis for Darwinism. But they had a problem. The genes are discrete units.
But I don't see what's wrong with that.
No, the problem was how can you create continuous variation from discrete units? Okay.
Well, the reason why I don't have a problem with that is that I don't see how even Darwin himself could have concluded that the variation is continuous in the physics sense of continuous, that you can take a small epsilon and you'll always be able to find a change between where you were before and where you are after, because you only have discrete amount of children.
Well, but that's why the survival of the fittest, and this is where Dawkins does a lot of his work with insects, with invertebrates, which have very large progenies, okay? We are a bit of an exception in many ways, human beings, in terms of the progeny. The progenies are huge in terms of evolutionary time scale. And I think exactly what you've described, a bit of an extreme version of it, of the epsilon that requires another epsilon, this is the way evolution was seen. I mean, this is the way most evolutionary biologists will see the progress. This is descent with modification. That is to say that in the next generation, some tweaks are going to have been produced by random mutation that is going to change the structure. If the structure is good, those variations in the alleles will be kept. And then epsilon by epsilon, evolutionary epsilons, you will transform one structure into another. Now, for you, it might not be a problem to see how these discrete units that people didn't know what they were really physically, they could measure their effects. How could they link to a continuous change? And it was Fisher. In fact, the whole world of statistics is founded by Ronald Fisher when trying to solve these problems. And he's the one that shows that by adding alleles and doing a lot of algebra and statistics, out of these individual elements that were discrete, you could create a continuum. Neo-Darwinism is the process whereby these people, particularly Huxley and Fisher, they put together this idea that they could reconcile the genetics that they had discovered with these changes that were continuous. That is Neo-Darwinism. Okay, it's called Neo-Darwinism because they felt that they had updated Darwinism.
I see. So Neo-Darwinism is not the same as genetic determinacy or genetic determinism?
Genetic determinism is something hanging on the wings of all this, okay? But Neo-Darwinism and the modern synthesis is that. Now, the genetic determinism is something that some people advocate, other people don't. It's a totally different story. Now, there is people claiming that that Darwin didn't explain everything, that Neo-Darwinism doesn't explain everything. And as I've said to you, I agree with that, but I don't think we have to throw everything that we have learned from genetics and population genetics and evolutionary genetics. I think we have to build on that and try to develop that further. And I think Dennis Noble, for example, is one that would throw the baby and the bath out of the window. And I don't think you can do that. I think there is no question that genes play a role. My question is, what is that role exactly relative to the cell in the building of an organism? Those are the questions that I'm interested in.